The dream of leaving a legacy. Harold Whitman was 72 years old when he finally realized that the most important dream he carried was not about himself, but about what he could leave behind. He had lived what many would call a modest life. Born in 1953 in a small town in Ohio, Harold grew up during an era when dreams were simple. Work hard, provide for your family, and do your best to be a good citizen. He married young, raised two children, and worked for more than 3 decades as a postal worker. His paychecks were never large, but they were steady, and with them he built a quiet, dependable life. Now in the autumn of his years, he spent his mornings on the porch of his little white house sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. The world had grown louder, faster, more complicated, but Harold had grown quieter. Age had stripped away the noise, leaving only the questions that mattered. And the biggest question of all was this: what would remain when I am gone? At 72, Harold thought often of his father, a man who had worked long hours in a factory and rarely spoke of his dreams. When his father died, all that remained were faded photographs in a shoebox. No letters, no journals, no stories written down. Harold loved his father deeply, but there was so much he never knew about him. What did he believe in? What did he regret? What did he hope for? Those questions lingered, unanswered, and Harold didn't want to leave his own children with the same emptiness. He wanted his children and grandchildren to know more than just the outline of his life. He wanted them to know the lessons he had learned from mistakes, the values that guided him when the road was unclear, and the love he carried even when he wasn't good at showing it. Most of all, he wanted them to understand that an ordinary man could live an extraordinary life if measured not by money or fame, but by kindness, resilience, and love. One crisp October morning, Harold pulled out a blank leather journal his daughter had given him for his birthday. The pages were white and intimidating, but after staring at them for a long time, he finally wrote his first line: "Dear family, this is my attempt to leave you something that matters." From that day forward, he wrote every morning. He wrote about the summers of his childhood when he played baseball in dusty fields until the sun disappeared. He wrote about meeting Margaret, the woman who became his wife, at a church picnic and how his heart had never beaten so fast. He wrote about raising children on a tight paycheck, about nights when he wasn't sure how to pay the bills but found a way anyway, about the quiet joy of coming home after a long shift and hearing laughter in the kitchen. He didn't stop at triumphs. He wrote about failures too: arguments that lasted too long, words spoken in anger that could not be taken back, regrets that still weighed on him. He wanted his children and grandchildren to see the whole man, not a polished version. Slowly, the pages filled, and then the journals multiplied into 3 thick volumes. But as Harold wrote, another thought grew inside him. Could his legacy reach beyond his family? He thought of the children in his neighborhood, many of them from broken homes, wandering streets without direction. He thought of the local library, the place that had once saved him as a boy with too many questions and not enough answers. One afternoon, Harold walked into that same library, now older and quieter than before, and asked if he could volunteer. Soon he was reading stories to children every Saturday. At first, he wasn't sure if they were listening, but then he noticed how their eyes widened when he spoke, how they leaned closer, how they began asking questions. "Mr. Harold," they would say, "tell us about when you were a kid." And so he did. He became a storyteller, not just to his family, but to a new generation. Legacy, Harold realized, was not only about leaving behind money or property. It was about planting seeds that would grow long after he was gone. On his porch, he began keeping a box labeled "For the Future." Inside, he placed little treasures: letters written to each grandchild, recipes Margaret had once loved to cook, photographs with notes scrawled on the back, and the journals filled with his memories. But perhaps the most important seeds he planted were not things he could hold. They were the invisible ones: the time he gave to others, the love he poured into his stories, the encouragement he offered to children who felt small and forgotten. One winter evening, as snow drifted gently outside, Harold sat with his daughter Emily by the fireplace. She picked up one of his journals, ran her hand over the pages, and said softly, "Dad, this means more than you know. Someday when you're not here, this will keep you with us." Tears welled in Harold's eyes. In that moment, he understood something he had never fully grasped before. Legacies are not measured by how long they last in the world, but by how deeply they touch the hearts of others. Harold never became famous. He never owned a big house or traveled across oceans. But as he grew older, he knew he had achieved something greater. He had lived a life that mattered, and he had ensured that the meaning of that life would not vanish when he was gone. His dream of leaving a legacy was never about monuments or riches. It was about love, memory, and the quiet but powerful ripple of kindness. And in that truth, Harold found peace.